Hey everybody, we're back talking about Solomon. Now Solomon, one of the things that he did do was he made the temple, the Solomon's temple, where people would go and the Ark of the Covenant was held down here, right down here, and that temple um, was the central focus of the Jewish worship, and it was the most important thing, and it is the center and focus of all Jewish life at the time. Um, so now we said that God was mad about the idolatry that Solomon did, but and he said he wouldn't take away the kingdom from him because of his love of David, his father, but he would take away the kingdom from his son. So now we get to the separation of Israel into the northern and southern kingdoms. So when Solomon died, his son, Rehoboam, is made king. And he's a young king, maybe 16, 17 years old, always looking to prove that he's worth it, right? And the times are tough and people are struggling. And one of David's leading um, advisors, Jeroboam, I know they sound similar, but Jeroboam comes to the king, Rehoboam, and says, Your Majesty, the taxes are super high. You need to reduce the taxes in order to allow the people to kind of unburden themselves. And Rehoboam says, Well, I'll think about it. And then he goes and talks to some of his teenage friends who are all like, No, you got to be tough. And they're like, No, because it was insulting that they asked you to reduce the taxes. You should raise them. So he goes back and tells Jeroboam, You tell the people, especially in the north, you know that they're going to have even more taxes because they dare to question me. And so they had um, so Jeroboam went up there and he told the northern tribes, and they were mad. And so they decided, we're going to break away and we're going to make you, Jeroboam, the king. And so what you have is 10 tribes in the north and two tribes in the south, one of them being Judah. And they separate into two different kingdoms, the northern kingdom and southern kingdom. Now, this is the time when prophets started to really kick off. And there were a lot of prophets that at that time were trying to go around to the kings and say, you guys are screwing this up. You need to change what you're doing. And they needed to they needed to change the way they were doing, as I was saying, and they made them. And a lot of times these prophets did not get received well. Now, prophets were not like, oh, I'm going to tell you what's in the future. No, it was like looking around, seeing, hey, things are terrible and things don't change right now. It's going to go bad. That's something you and I can do. And so you have these prophets, and they're a big part of the Old Testament. Now, you have a series of these kingdoms in the northern and southern kingdoms that are um, that go good and go bad. There's just a list of different kings in the north, kings in the south, and in the south, it's kind of like you have two or three bad kings and then a good king, and two or three bad kings and then a good king, and it goes kind of in that. In the north, it's like four, or five bad kings and then maybe a good one, right? So the North is seen as kind of the worst of the two different kingdoms as far as being faithful to God, and the South being a little more faithful, although they weren't exactly angels either. And so we come to a big pig goes rotten. We're going to go through and finish up the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Scriptures, as they're called, um, with the challenge of um, these attacking empires that come in and what they do the um, to the people. So the first of them, and I have up here, a big pig goes rotten. ABPGR. The first is Assyrians. A. This is the loss of the northern empires. So you have the Assyrians come into the north, and they take over the northern kingdom. And they basically give them three options. Listen, we could kill you, which not many people took that option. Number two, you can come back with us to Assyria and be our slaves. Again, not many people took that option. The third one is we can intermingle with you in your marriages and you can worship our gods too, and you can kind of, and you can be part of us. And most people decided that that might be the best way. And so they kind of became, and they settled in this place called Samaria, and they were known as Samaritans. Now, the people in the southern kingdom were like, you guys are going back on God and just like taking these idols and, not taking death. And the people of Samaria are like, yeah, well, what do you want us to do? And so the Jewish people, so now they were Israelites, but now as primarily the southern kingdom is now primarily centered on the tribe of Judah, so they get known as Jews. So these Jews in the south, they're judging the Samaritans up there, who are now the northern kingdom is completely gone and never comes back. The next thing that we have, and move this out of the way, is you have the Babylonians come. And the Babylonians sweep through the Assyrians, super powerful. And as they're on their way down, um, the people of Israel, or the people of Judah, the Jewish people, are looking up there, going, "Oh boy, we're in trouble." And so did the people of Egypt. And so Egypt sends word to Israel, like, "Let's band together, and let's fight these Babylonians." And the Israelites are like, "Oh, should we do it? Should we make this deal? Make this?" And there were prophets like the prophet Jeremiah who was like, "No, God has protected us before. We have to trust that God will protect us. We don't need to make a deal with these Egyptians who are non-believers." And Hezekiah makes the deal. Um, and the Babylonians come in and they sweep through because the Egyptians said, "Hey, we'll send you soldiers to help defend. You just start the battle." The Egyptians were never planning on sending any help, and they were just looking out for their own interest. So what happens here is that the temple is destroyed, and the people are carried off all the way back to Babylon, and they have to serve there in exile. And this is where we have things like the prophet Daniel. And if you've ever heard of three brothers who would not bow down to the Babylonian kings, and their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they were thrown into a fiery furnace where they didn't burn up at all. So you have these stories. So the Jewish people were in exile. So that's a B for a big. Now we come to the pig, and that is going to be the Persians. So the Persians come in and they sweep down and they take over. They take over all of the Babylonian Empire, and their view was that um, under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, they said, well, we're not going to take over and destroy people because we have such a vast empire. We're going to allow people to worship as they want and to be happy, so that they're not going to rebel against us. And so they sweep into Babylon and they look down into the hole, and there's the Jews down there as in exile. And they're like, "Hey, who are you guys?" And they're like, "We're the Jews, hey." And the Persians are like, "Well, you're free." And they're like, "What? We're free?" "Yeah." Like, well, and they said, "And now we got the long journey back." And the Persians are like, "Well, where are you headed?" And they're like, "Well, we got to go all the way back to Canaan." And the Persians are like, "Yeah, well, we're driving there now. You want to jump in the back?" So the Persians helped the Jews get back to the promised land, and then they drop them off there in Jerusalem. And there is they look up and the temple's destroyed, and they're like, "Oh man, our temple's destroyed." And the Persians are like, "Yeah, well, Stan back there's got some tools. You want him to help?" And so the Persians help the 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 Jewish people like build their temple back up. And that's where we'll leave that for now, and we'll get to the last part um, of the story,